Good evening. This is Pamela, and you're listening to Watchman on the Pod. All right, we're going to pick back up in our book reading. The Pope, Chief of Chief of White Slavers, High Priest of Intrigue. We are on the third letter, I believe. Yes, to Pope Pius X. Subject: the failure of the Romanist priesthood as an instrumentality of human upliftment. Your Holiness, your priesthood has been tried and found wanting. Your missionaries have nowhere builded structures of permanency. Why? Because they have preached popery, not the gospel of Jesus Christ. You point, indeed, to your Francis Xaviers and others. Xavier was a gloomy fanatic whose work left no ending result in the Far East, where your historians claim for him millions of conversions. Compared, he may not be for one moment with the immortal David Livingstone, brave, tireless watchman of the night, who toiled when all was dark. What other man but true Christian missionary like Livingstone could draw fitting eulogy like that from the diamond pen of Adelaide M. Plumtree? Who is to that asked that he be not forgot? Why should he miss his fellow's common lot? Why speak of him after 100 years, when time has woven oblivion over his peers? This was the man who left the laboring loom, forsook the student's life to pierce the gloom of matted jungle, braved the swamp's false breath, in Africa, where oftentimes lonely death stood by the flood, lurked in the treacherous grass, and watched with greedy eyes his victim pass. Dauntless the traveler walked, nor storm nor sun feared he, immortal, till his work was done. Light-weighted he wealth and those dear household joys that dip the scale when men in judgment poise that good against this, well knowing that they choose. But once he chose, he wittingly to lose. All that strong men hold dear that he might save from his long doom of woe the moaning slave. This was his hope, to salve the open sore that bled the world, and for this cause he bore loss of all earthly honors, counting it but gain if he might win the world to loathe the stain and curse of slavery. Yet not this alone could satisfy the heart of Livingstone. Forever as he went, he held on high the cross of him who loved enough to die. So passed he through the land, righting the wrong, helping the weak to struggle with the strong, telling of love and making love seem true, because he sought the deeds of love to do. I have an interesting testimony from the very Reverend E.J. Vatman, missionary, apostolic, and chaplain, U.S. Army, an enterprising Catholic priest who, by President McKinley's own appointment, visited the Philippine Islands on an official mission. His mission was to ascertain, right on the ground, the social and religious conditions of the Philippine populations, with the view of enabling the American government to devise, from information such as he might obtain, the best measures for establishing an enduring form of government in the archipelago under distinctly American auspices. Father Vatman informed me personally on his return from the Philippines that 98% of the priests in the Philippines were living brazenly and defiantly in concubinage, the most flagrant and often revolting. When Vatman gave me this information, he was soliciting immunity from exposure for his friend and co-worker, Father Heldman, to whose shameless exploits explicit reference is made on pages 412 and 415 of my book, Romanism, A Menace to the Nation. Vatman, when stationed as senior U.S. Army chaplain of Fort Sheridan, near Chicago, spent the major part of his time going about from one priest's house to another in the city, dining, wining, and soliciting moneys for purgatorial masses, reaping rich harvests indeed. Vatman is now a pensioner of the United States Treasury, but besides drawing pay from our government for service, he acts as secretary, member of the board of directors, and of the executive committee of the Catholic Colonization Society USA, with headquarters in Chicago. This society has agents at work all over Europe. See Romanism, a Menace to the Nations, Chapter 6, page 104 and 108. For his services as secretary and director of this organization, Vatman draws liberal pay. He stands in well with railroads and other transportation agencies, to whose revenues the land companies controlled by this Catholic Colonization Society are liberal contributors for the conveyance of immigrants to their destinations in various parts of the West and Southwest. The owners of the lands upon which the Catholic settlements of Vatman's organization are founded provide, free of charge, Romanist church buildings, schools, nunneries, and priest houses, thus placing foreign governed Roman Church in absolute control of large sections of American territory. Your missionaries replace a purely pagan superstition with a semi-Christian superstition, incapable of inspiring respect for the Christian domestic life established by the religious system of Jesus Christ. Your unmarried missionaries often lead, in pagan lands, lives sadly at variance with gospel teachings. The lecturous missionary cannot inspire intelligent heathens, millions of intelligent heathens there are, with respect for clean, moral living. Your clergy are taught disrespect for the married state. Often they revolt from the cruel condition of unmoral servitude imposed by a heartless system. A recent instance is just one of many constantly occurring in this and other countries. Vows of celibacy cast off by priests for a rectorship. Special dispatch to Commercial Tribune, New York, February 16th. For the first time in New York church circles, a Roman Catholic priest of years' experience, and for the last 5 years of great prominence, entered today upon the rectorship of a Protestant Episcopal church. The Reverend William Thomas Walsh, a leading member of the Society of St. Paul, or as they are better known, the Paulist Fathers, whose church is that of St. Paul the Apostle at Columbus Avenue and 60th Street, became rector of St. Mary's Episcopal Church, Alexander Avenue, near 142nd Street, one of the old and well-known Episcopal churches of the Bronx. During his connection with the Paulist Fathers, Father Walsh was one of the special preachers to non-Catholics. He was selected for this work because of his eloquence and because of his ability to argue in favor of Catholicism and against the Protestants. Last November, Bishop Greer received him into the Episcopal Church without additional ordination, but requiring a good deal of study of the Protestant position. Today, he put him in charge of St. Mary's, whose vestry was formally elected him rector. The Commercial Tribune, Cincinnati, February 17, 1913. The Independent, New York, July 3, 1913, refers to the withdrawal within a few years of 7 Paulist fathers from that order, and not a few other priests in this country and in Europe, a number of them even Jesuits. No respect has your system for the sacredness of the marriage tie. Money may buy divorce from your courts, which override and defy all state laws on the subject of marriage. How the papal divorce tribunals bleed litigants for all they are worth is clear from the following. Rota, Rota, to consider Gold Talleyrand marriage, defender of matrimonial bond, appeals from recent annulment. Rome, March 8th. Monsignor Perilio, defender of the matrimonial bond, has appealed against the recent decision of the Rota Tribunal, annulling the marriage of Count Boni di Castellane and Anna Gold, now the Duchess di Talleyrand. Two decisions have already been rendered by this court. The first against Count di Castellane, who sought the annulment, and the second reversing the former decree and granting the annulment. The case will now come up for the third time at the sitting of Rota, about 2 months hence, and Monsignor Perilio J.'s appeal has been entrusted to Monsignor John Pryor, an English member of the Rota Tribunal, for necessary investigations. No matter what the decision of this court may be, another appeal is possible, but only if based on the errors in the procedure or in the law or on new evidence. In that event, the Signatura Tribunal, the Supreme Court of the Vatican, might either reject the appeal or, if it admits the claims, decide that there must be another hearing before the Rota Tribunal. It is not probable that a final decision will be reached before July or August. Courier Journal, Louisville, Kentucky, March 9, 1913. Boni Castellane wins new victory. Papal tribunal annuls marriage. Verdict will be combated by another body. Special cable to commercial tribune. Rome, May 3rd. The verdict of the tribunal of the Rota annulling the marriage of Count Boni di Castellane to Anna Gold, now the Duchess of Talleyrand Perigord, will shortly be published. Count Boni di Castellane has been trying to secure this annulment for some time, and has carried the matter through several of the Vatican tribunals. The following is an authentic summary of the decision of the Rota Tribunal. This case was brought before 3 judges of the Rota Tribunal, who heard the evidence of the plaintiff, which showed that Anna Gold's consent to a Catholic ceremony and the other necessary agreements before the marriage was invalid. Following this witness, the court heard Count John D. Castellane, a brother of the plaintiff, Prince John del Drago, and Mrs. Catherine Cameron. Further evidence was brought by the plaintiff to show that even after their marriage, Anna insisted that she was free to divorce her husband. The evidence produced by the defendant with the object of proving that neither before nor after marriage had she spoken of divorce consisted of the following witnesses: Howard Gould, Edwin Gould, George Gould, Edith Kingdon Gould, Addie Woodward Adams, Edna Montgomery. After quoting numerous canons, the judge declared the marriage null and void for lack of consent. As soon as this decision is promulgated, the defenders of the matrimonial bond will appeal against it, and the case will be brought before the Rota Tribunal. The Duchess Talleyrand Perigord has instructed Monsignor Teresi to look after her interests and further evidence, since the case has been decided against her for lack of sufficient evidence. The Commercial Tribune, Cincinnati, May 4, 1913. Pope Pius X, Vicar of Christ, acting as Chief Justice in the Castellane Gould divorce case, recently before the Vatican Supreme Court of Divorce, decides finally in favor of Count Boni. The Catholic Telegraph, June 19, 1913, tells part of the inhuman, unchristian story. Castellane Gould case finally decided in favor of the Count. Catholic Press Association. Rome, June 7th. The second Rota judgment in the Castling-Gould marriage case upsets the previous sentence and declares the marriage null. The Count based his first appeal to the Holy See on the plea that Anna Gould married him with the intention of getting a divorce, which is contrary to the very essence of Christian marriage. The Rota found that his case was not sufficiently proved and decided against him. He appealed. The evidence he adduced was that a quarter of an hour before the marriage, Anna Gould declared to the Count's mother, that she did not really know if she wished to be married or not. To the Prince del Drago she said, "Yes, I will go before the Archbishop, as you tell me that it must be so. But understand clearly, I am getting married without really knowing why, and under pressure from the Count, without having time to reflect. In my case, I want both you and the Count to fully understand that I am a Protestant and an American, while he is a Catholic and French, that marriage for us has not the same significance, and that I am determined to leave him and get a divorce if I like. If we have the advantage over you Catholics that we can marry again and you cannot, that is why I do not want to become a Catholic." Wow, she was like deceived there on that. 3 other witnesses besides the Prince del Drago bore out this statement. Anna Gould denied having used these words and said she accepted the marriage freely. She never spoke of divorce during the first 3 years of married life. Then she had suspicions later amounting to certainty of his infidelity, and she got a separation and subsequently a divorce. Asked if at the moment of marriage she intended to remain always with her husband, or if she had a divorce in her mind, she replied, "I was still quite a child. The possibility of a second marriage had not occurred to me. I said yes, as I was getting married in the ordinary way that anyone gets married. I had no other thought." The judges note several discrepancies in her evidence. Turning to the law of the case, they put above all the absolute principle of the dissolubility of marriage being a sacrament. They quote authorities from St. Thomas Aquinas to Cardinal Gaspari to the effect that a marriage in which the indissolubility is not recognized is not a marriage. On that account, they upset the previous decision and declare the marriage null. The Roman Catholic Church decrees and declares that her pious, pure, faithful, and loyal son, Bonnie, is now free to marry again, and that the children born to him by his lawful and legitimate wife, Anna Castell, knee Gould as bastards. Were the litigants in this Castellane case poor, Rome had never given it the smallest attention. But Bonnie de Castellane has managed somehow to lay hand on an abundant supply of cash. The Duke de Sagan has now and always has had it in plenty, so also have the Goulds. Goulds. I don't know how you want to say this. Goulds. Goulds. Thus, the Roman ecclesiastical vampires fatten on the prolongation of this and similar cases. And yet, we are told there is no divorce in the Catholic Church. The most indecent and libidinous books extant are the treatises on what the Romanist clerk call moral theology. These books are for the exclusive use of the clergy. They laugh and joke about their suggestiveness in everyday speech. Before, in fact, any young man is advanced to priestly order, he is subjected to special instruction on sins of the flesh, even the most forbidding and abominable, by some older priestly professor. To keep up appearances as defenders of social purity, the Romanist bishops of Ireland have of late entered into a crusade against British papers accused of licentious tendencies and teachings. A letter from Dublin, February 22, 1913, to the Courier Journal, Louisville, Kentucky, gives a view of this hypercritical, not to say hypocritical, not to say hypocritical Romanist movement. Dublin, February 22nd. Special. The campaign against the vile publications which come to us from across the water. The words are those used by Catholic Bishop of Derry, gathers in force and vehemence. It must be admitted that the enthusiasm which was led to the boycott of Dublin news stories which handle certain English publications is not entirely due to a dislike of pernicious literature. The opportunity of getting even with English newspapers is far too tempting to be resisted. With characteristic humor, even the hooligans of Dublin have joined in this purity crusade, which was for its professed object the suppression of the sale in Ireland of a half a dozen Sunday newspapers published in England, which get huge circulation chiefly by their detailed reports of filthy divorce and police court cases. So people were gossips back then too. It will interest American readers to know that the Sunday newspaper published by W.R. Hearst in London, the Weekly Budget, is not blacklisted by these crusaders. It is one of the few English Sunday newspapers that are now allowed to be sold openly in the streets of Dublin. May cause trouble. This agitation has always resulted in arrest and may cause actions for criminal conspiracy to be brought by the English proprietors of the banned newspapers. Two well-to-do brothers named Larkin recently were arrested and fined $5 apiece for causing obstruction on Sunday afternoon by distributing handbills in Dorset Street, outside of an offending news vendor's store, and refusing to desist in compliance with the policeman's request. The Larmans are members of the Dublin Vigilance Committee, supported by practically every bishop in Ireland, and is adopting in the cause of Christian purity those time-honored methods of boycott and intimidation that played such prominent part in Ireland's struggle for self-government. The handbills which caused the disturbance bore the inscription, "Don't deal with shops which sell bad Sunday papers or other evil literature." After the arrests were made, a great crowd threw mud into the news vendor's store, and his windows were covered with purity placards. Other arrests are likely to be made in the near future. An interesting phase of this agitation is that in the eye of the law, the blacklisted English newspapers are entirely respectable. They also have the largest circulations of any newspaper in the world, two of them exceeding 2 million every Sunday. Yet they publish details in connection with assault and other cases that would never find their way into a daily newspaper in the United States. Irish are determined. How determined the Irish people are to put a stop to the circulation of such newspapers can be gauged with the statements made on the subject by the following religious leaders. Cardinal Logue: I have often been warned the people against the moral ruin to which so many are exposed by vile publications, which are not only offered but forced upon them by every device ingenuity can suggest. Unscrupulous agents for a little ill-gotten gain circulate these publications in spite of all remonstrance. What is most astonishing is that this corrupting traffic goes on openly under the very eyes of the supposed guardians of public order and decency, without the least effort to bring the delinquents to account. They tell of detectives and employ every device and disguise, and rightly so, to trap even those who adulterate food. One would think that similar ingenuity would be well employed in detecting the corrupters of public morals. It is not so in other countries, even in those governed by the professed enemies of Christianity, thank God. Our people have at last taken the matter in their own hands, and they have embarked in a noble cause. Dr. Walsh, Archbishop of Dublin, There are in this city persons calling themselves Catholics who, by taking part in this sinful traffic in publications of debasing, seductive, or otherwise irreligious character, lend themselves to the diabolical work of undermining both the morals and the faith of our Catholic people. Let it be clearly understood that such unworthy members of the Church, as long as they perverse in their evil courses, are unworthy to be admitted to the sacraments. Dr. Healy advises a boycott. Dr. Healy, Archbishop of Tom, those booksellers where this unsavory 190 the Pope, high priest of intrigue, literature is exposed for sale must be cautioned, and if they persist in this noxious traffic, the faithful must be warned against frequenting their shops for any purpose. Dr. Finlay, Archbishop of Cashel. In the case of the destroyers of purity by the sale of bad literature, the Lord will rush at them on the day of judgment with the fury of a wild beast, robbed of her whelps, and take vengeance on them for the souls which he is being robbed by their abominable traffic. Dr. McHugh, Bishop of Derry. Irish publications, like the Irish press, are as a rule pure and clean. The great source of danger is to be found in the vile publications which come to us from across the water. It is not an intolerable state of things to find a few persons, for the sake of worldly gain, undermining the corrupting and morality of a people. From the foregoing, it can be readily seen how determined and serious are the leading spirits of this campaign. Although half the zest of the fight, from the public point of view, lies in the fact that all this class of literature is published in well-behaved England. If the prohibition of immoral literature came from a notably clean and moral body of men, attention profound it would surely command. But the Irish Roman Catholic bishops are not noteworthy for clean moral living or sobriety. One Irish bishop was by Leo VIII forced to resign on a well-proven charge of bastardy. Others, just as guilty, have escaped deposition because cunning enough to cover their tracks. There lived for several years in Toronto, Canada, one Timothy Mahoney, Bishop of Udacea, in partibus infidelum, in infidel parts, auxiliary to the Archbishop of Toronto, and pastor of St. Paul's Roman Catholic Church in that city. This man, O'Mahony, came to Canada with a past redolent of grossest licentiousness. O'Mahony, native of Cork, Ireland, was product direct and legitimate of the Roman propaganda. Educated in Rome, ordained in Rome, Roman to the very utmost limits of his being, in morality, in ambition, and in activity, he came back to Cork, where he was appointed assistant pastor of St. Finbard's parish. To prove the orthodoxy and thoroughness of his Roman training, he became, while there, father of a child, Mary O'Mahony, named soon after, in 1870, Bishop of Armidale, Australia. He voted in the Vatican Council for papal infallibility and then went to his Antipodine diocese to test the fallibility of women. He became in a short time father of several children. Archbishop Vaughan of Sydney, impelled by public opinion, petitioned Rome for O'Mahony's removal. Brazen and defiant, O'Mahony went to the Eternal City and made some attempt at defense, but the propaganda, knowing his record in Ireland and in Australia, promoted his lordship to Toronto, Canada. Let him be promoted that he may be removed. And this is an asterisk right here. It says, when bishops have to be shelved for crime or any other cause or given a titular standing, Rome accords them a title taken from Aegean Sea Islands or Asia or Africa, where schismatics, pagans, and infidels now hold sway. The shelved or nominal prelate is not obliged to go to his new diocese. He is simply reduced to a condition of innocuous desuetude. Leo VIII abolished the title in partibus infidelium, substituting for it titular bishop of Edodesia, I don't know, coadjutor and auxiliary bishop receive only titular standing. That sounds so strange, titular. Archbishop John Joseph Lynch of Toronto, himself under gravest charges of personal misconduct, happened at the time to be in Rome. Lynch entered into an agreement with the propaganda. If the latter dropped its charges against him, he, Lynch, would relieve Rome and the propaganda of the very unwelcome presence and inopportunities of Papa O'Mahony. Coming to Canada, O'Mahony began conspiring against his benefactor Lynch and made himself odious to the public in the Christian city of Toronto by some deplorable alcoholic outbreaks. There was, in 1874, held at Quebec a bicentenary celebration of the foundation of that Roman Catholic diocese. Bishops from all parts of the Canadian Dominion were invited to be present. The English-speaking preacher for the occasion was to be the Most Reverend John Joseph Lynch of Toronto, but His Grace was, on the night appointed for his sermon, so very much under the influence of intoxicants as to be forced to remain in retirement. The sermon was preached by an itinerant priest. The Right Reverend John Walsh, Bishop of London, Ontario, Canada, paid for years' house rent for a disreputable woman. The same prelate was several times taken off the street by his priest when his helplessly intoxicated condition gave scandal to passer-by. His grossly immoral conduct caused several sisters to leave one of the convents of his episcopal city. His administration there ended in financial scandal. The same bishop imported from Ireland a priest whom he appointed secretary of the diocese and pastor of St. Mary's Church, London. His lordship's secretary proved an enterprising disciple of Venus. An enterprising disciple of Venus. He supported several mistresses. He was forbidden the home of a well-known Catholic publisher. This judicious publisher, having an impressionable daughter who had fallen victim of the secretary's good graces. This lecherous ambassador of Christ is now office bearer, to wit, one of the examiners of the clergy in the state of Nebraska. For his success in promoting morality per se et per alios, the Libanius, Bishop of London aforesaid, was by Rome promoted to the Archiepiscopal See of Toronto, Canada. The Right Reverend John O'Brien, D.D., Bishop of Kingston, Ontario, died in 1879 of alcoholism in a Quebec hotel. The See of Kingston, hold on 1 minute. I thought I was going to sneeze. The See of Kingston, having fallen vacant under circumstances most painful and humiliating, the Vatican appointed thereto an Irish priest, James Vincent Cleary, of the Diocese of Waterford. Cleary was high-strung, injudicious, and intemperate. He had large quantities of Irish whiskey shipped to him direct from the old sod, the boxes bearing the label, "Books not to be opened." A zealous customs officer at Kingston, allowing his curiosity to master discretion, once insisted on having a box of these episcopally consigned books opened. There were in the box more Bibles than books. But the indiscreet officer soon after got warning from his superiors at Ottawa to leave the bishop's books severely alone. A favorite at the Vatican in marked decree was Bishop Cleary. He was a liberal contributor to Peter's Pence collections. He brought on his every visit to Rome a heavy contribution, living et armis, from his Canadian diocese. Bishop Cleary was in consequence promoted to archiepiscopal honors. but no honors that Rome could give increased his popularity in the Canadian Dominion. He was, from first to last, one of the most unpopular prelates that ever held ecclesiastical sway in the Dominion. J. M. Bruyere, who served as vicar general under 3 upper Canadian bishops, D. Charbonneau of Toronto, Pinsonneault of Sandwich, and Walsh of London, had a typically interesting missionary career. Coming to America from Lyons, France, he first distinguished himself in New Orleans as an ardent devotee of Venus. Things getting too warm for him on the Gulf Coast, he moved northward to Kentucky. There, his attention to Negro wenches and white slaves involving him in trouble, he moved to Toronto, where Bishop D. Charbonneau, his fellow countryman, made him vicar general. He was not long in Toronto till he seduced a young woman of St. Paul's Parish. Father Fitzmaurice, a respectable priest, pastor of that church, entered formal protest against Bruyere before Bishop Phelan of Kingston, senior bishop of the province. But Bishop Phelan, dying a few days after the receipt of the complaint without action taken thereon, the Fitzmaurice document found among Phelan's papers were acted on in a way very different from that which justice and decency called for. D. Charbonneau, getting hold of the complaint, suspended Fitzmaurice for noble duty done. The people of Toronto refused, however, to approve Bishop D. Charbonneau's actions, all the more so as Salarine, another French vicar general of this very French bishop, had about the same time seduced a nun. Murmurs of discontent first filled the air. A roar of indignation was headed off by the Vatican, which advised of the demoralization brought on in Toronto by the beastly impurity of that city's 2 vicar generals, Bruyere and Salarine, as well as other priests in high places, disgusted at D. Charbonneau's incompetency, which had made him a byword and a reproach among leading Canadian Catholics, finally forced him to take an Irish-born coadjutor, the aforesaid John Joseph Lynch, who consecrated on November 20th, 1859, became Bishop of Toronto, April 26, 1860. D. Charbonneau, followed by curses of a long outraged people, retired into a French monastery where he died in obscurity in 1891. Bonnier withdrew on D. Charbonneau's retirement from Toronto to another French bishop, Pinsonneault of Sandwich, a little French town opposite Detroit, made an episcopal see solely because it was French. There, Bonnier, installed again as vice-general, once more made himself odious to priest and people. Pinsonneault, vain and weak-minded, following Bruyère's evil counsels, went on from one blunder to another till forced to resign in 1866. After a 10 years' inglorious administration, he sunk into needed oblivion. When the aforesaid John Walsh became, in November 1867, Bishop of Sandwich, he retained Bonnier as Vicar General. Moving the see back to London in 1869, Walsh brought Bruyère to that thriving city. There, for 20 or more years, this little Frenchman, owing to Walsh's alcoholic incompetency, lorded it mercilessly over priest and religious, male and female. His whole career in America was blackened by cruelty, lust, and selfish intolerance. Typical Roman missionary indeed. The case of Reverend J. P. Mulfey of Ingersoll, Ontario, calls for the special mention. Dying, this man left $10,000 to a young lady, Miss Blank, forgetting his two poor sisters whose hard-earned money made by them as chambermaids in New York City, secured him ordination as a priest. Moltke stood at one time so high in his church as to be elected to the office of Grand President of the Catholic Mutual Benefit Association, commonly called the CMBA, noble, celibate, in very truth. Coming to Ottawa, the capital of the Canadian Dominion, we find a young French-Canadian priest named Duhamel, made in 1874. Bishop of that important see. Little else had this young man to commend him for episcopal honor, save the fact of his being a French Canadian, an all-important qualification for the hierarchs of Quebec. The most active priest then in Ottawa was a native of Old France, Father Pourcel. Full of Gallic enthusiasm, Pourcel established, with Bishop Dunham's warmest approval, a new religious order to be devoted to teaching Catholic children. Some well-meaning young men entered the new order. It had not been many weeks in existence when the whole community was startled and shocked by the revelation that Pourcel had attempted to pervert the first home of the new order into a temple of Sodom. Pourcel fled, and the short-lived order was suppressed. Not so, however, Pourcel. He joined in New York the Order of the Fathers of Mercy. Of this order, notwithstanding his Ottawa record, he became a presiding officer. He established at Vineland, New Jersey, under the auspices of the Fathers of Mercy, a College of the Sacred Heart, which became in a very short time such a repellent den of infamy that upon repeated complaints from Vineland's good citizens, Bishop O'Farrell of Trenton was compelled to suppress the institution. Pourcel is now, or was recently, pastor of Our Ladies of Lourdes Church, Brooklyn, New York. Some years after his Pourcelian experience, Bishop Dunham sent for clerical training to Rome a young Irish-Canadian candidate for holy orders named Farrell J. McGovern. Returning to Canada immediately after ordination, McGovern was named private secretary to His Grace Archbishop Duhamel. The latter had been, in 1886, raised to the archiepiscopal honors due his overwhelmingly generous contributions to Peter's pence. Young McGovern, profiting by his Roman training and experiences, resolved to secure for his own use and benefit in Ottawa a subservient devotee priestess. He found the priestess, but his attention to the lady were so defiant of discretion and decency that the archbishop was obliged to relegate his private secretary to rural quiet and oblivion. Interesting, too, is the case of Father H.J. McDevitt, D.D., Doctor of Divinity, now of Portland, Oregon, where he is rector of the cathedral. McDevitt is a graduate of the American College in Rome, made pastor soon after ordination of the Sacred Heart Parish, Dayton, Ohio. He led a life of scandal so gross that he had to fly suddenly and finally from that city and state under threat of certain public exposure. The article for the press in the McDevitt Scandal had been actually written and was ready for publication at the time of his flight. McDevitt told his credulous friends before leaving Dayton that, finding the life of the ordinary secular priest not rigorous enough, he had decided on joining the Passionists, should it be passionate, fathers. Instead, he went to Omaha, but things getting too hot for him even there, he moved to the more inviting and salubrious atmosphere of the Pacific Coast. He is Archbishop Christie's Fides Acats and champion of the Knights of Columbus. McDevitt's successor as pastor of the Sacred Heart Parish, Dayton, was Fathers Finetry, who had for housekeeper an English ex-barmaid of undoubted sportive proclivities. Finitry's conduct with this and other women was so shameless as to constitute a grievous public scandal. He went so far as to visit a hotel in a neighboring city with his ex-barmaid mistress and register with her as husband and wife. This audacious indecency forced the Catholics of Dayton to rid themselves of his uncleanly presence. A Domitian priest named Thompson was, according to the Daily News, Portland, Oregon, December 3, 1909, indicted there by the federal grand jury for sending indescribably obscene matter through the United States mail to two women in San Francisco. The evidence against Thompson was overwhelming and most revolting. Language refuses to express the baseness of the fellow's conduct. Decency rebels at the monstrosity of his indecencies. There is no parallel for his fiendishness, even in the annals of the Borgian papal era. I have personally knowledge of all the facts and details of this most forbidding case derived from official sources, which, should it be translated into print, would damn forever the whole iniquitous institution of the Romish priesthood. Reverend Father W.R. Thompson was brought before Judge Wolverton to head off revolting exposures. Priest Thompson entered at once a plea of guilty. There was no evidence in detail submitted. The confession of guilt was made to preclude it. Judge Wolverton, instead of immediately pronouncing condign punishment on this vile transgressor of all laws of civic and personal, Christian and individual decency, suspended sentence. Mild, humane judge. How considerate to a priestly leper deliberately using the mails of the United States to spread the virulence of his own moral distemper. Judge Wolverton, finally yielding to the pressure of prelates, priests, and politicians, turned Thompson over to the Domitian fathers with the understanding that he be placed in a sanitarium. Where is Thompson today? Why is he not behind prison bars? Why is not this wretch who polluted the country's mails with sponges filled with his own... Oh my. What? Seminal emissions not on a rock pile where others are expiating crimes of less revolting character. Let intriguing Romish prelate and ward-heeling Knight of Columbus answer. Why is this infamous corrupter of American womanhood, this base and brutal violator of American homes, permitted to walk a free man on the soil of the United States, while the youth who steals a nickel, mayhap to buy food, is incarcerated for years in reformatory cells? The Thompson incident is typical manifestation of uncontrollable priestly lust and turpitude. All who dare do it, I prefer to priests, or would do as Thompson did, if the fear of lynch law did not hold them back. Among Rome's legion of lecherous priests in America, there are hundreds of Thompsons. Look to it, reader, that some such a one is not at this moment polluting the sanctuary of your own home, or at all events busy with lechery in your own hometown. The post office department at Washington is being appealed to by the Roman Catholic societies and by individual Romanists of influence, lay and clerical, to exclude the menace and such papers from the mails. The menace is letting in light on the Roman infamies, such as the Thompson case. This good work is being promoted by several other papers of courage and conviction. The Romanists demand the exclusion of all such from the mails. Romanists complain of the menace and papers of its kind and class, but is there one of their own publications that does not, week in and week out, month in and month out, wallow in libelous and lying attacks on Protestant Christians and on Protestant organizations? Protestant denominations are, by the Romanist press, denounced continually in language of the foulest character. Protestant clergymen of highest class and standing culminated and vilified in lowest forms of speech. Protestant societies and orders charged with every crime on the calendar. Protestant missionaries abused and ridiculed. The Catholic paper and periodical reek with infamous libel. Libel is, in fact, their chief stock in trade. Without it, they had little to say. With it, they fill column after column with choices, Billingsgate, and coarse mendaciousness. The young mind, fed on the unchristian, iniquitous, untruthful, and slanderous pabulum doled out every week by the Catholic press, blessed by Pope and commended by prelates and priests, the people in many cases are ordered to pay for and take these vile sheets, is certain to be warped and darkened, perverted, and demoralized. If the mails of the United States are to be denied to any class of papers, it should be a Romanist organs of mendacity and calumny. Catholic books, too, filled with savage assaults on Protestantism, or reeking with obscene filth, or blackened with historic lie, pass in tons every year through the mails of the United States. Should these not call for attention from the Postmaster General? Now, I do ask the fair-minded people of America, and the Post Office Department in particular, are you going to deny the mails to the Menace and other outspoken American papers and permit priestly violators of America's postal laws like Thompson to go scot-free? When convicted of guilty misuse and pollution of the mails, is there to be one law for Protestant Americans and another for Romanist priests? Must the one suffer for denouncing organized crime while the other is permitted to use the mails of the country to debauch girlhood and destroy womanhood? Does Woodrow Wilson's administration want to plunge America into the horrors of a revolution? No city in all rural Ohio with a more law-abiding and self-respecting Christian people than Troy in Miami County. Startled beyond power of expression was this decent community when in the early spring of 1906, rumor specified and persistent fastened on Reverend Father F.J. Kipner of St. Patrick's Church, the shockingly atrocious charge of mistreating several young girls of his parish in manner by method of revolting and unnatural indecency. These stupendous indecencies were committed on young girls, most of them not yet out of short dresses, while Kipner was ostensibly preparing them for confession and first communion. Advised of Kipner's misconduct, Archbishop Moyler tardily appointed one Quatman, priest of Sydney, Ohio, to visit Troy and investigate the charges against Kipner. Kipner had meantime fled the coop. Quatman's visit to Troy had been fixed by Archbishop Moyler for a Sunday, but on the previous Wednesday Kipner got to Cincinnati, whence, with the connivance, no doubt, of his superiors, he fled and departs for a time to the general public unknown. Quantum, after reading at the close of Holy Mass the letter of Archbishop Moeller of Cincinnati, sympathizing with the broken-hearted parents of the outraged girls and with the congregation generally, knew very well that Kipner was somewhere beyond the clutches of Ohio law and the indignation of an aroused American community, closely safeguarded from punishment by Holy Mother Church. Hence he, Quatman, felt free to condemn in stentorian tones the infamous and unnatural fugitive from justice and hope that he might be captured. Quantum read also to the congregation of St. Patrick's, Troy, the archiepiscopal document appointing him auditor of an investigating committee, and then bravely invited everyone knowing anything against the fugitive Kipner to appear before him. William Burgin, father of one of the wronged girls, who had sworn out a warrant against Kipner, made accordingly a statement to Quatman, who urged him not to blame the church or Kipner's family for the misdeeds of the foul priestly monster, flying from the law and from the wrath of an outraged Christian community. Here it is pertinent to call attention to the bull issued October 9, 1911, by Pope Pius X, which excommunicates any person, lay or cleric, man or woman, who shall, without the permission of ecclesiastical authority, summon any Roman Catholic ecclesiastic before a lay tribunal, either in a civil or criminal case. Really? Between the Wednesday when Kipner was seen in Cincinnati and the Sunday on which Quatman visited Troy, Kipner had found time, as it soon after developed, to get over to Canada and find safe asylum in one of the clerical fortresses of that country, where priestly inebriates, lecturers, seducers, sodomites, and murderers obtained for a time hospitable and even luxurious cover. Quatman's Jay's investigation was a farce. Moeller's letters added insult to injury, for Moeller actually paid for Kipner's keep in Canada. Hold on 1 minute. Ooh, we're reaching an hour. These ecclesiastical houses of refuge, relaxation, and entertainment for criminal priests, of which there are several in the United States, are worth attention from officers of justice and public generally. There are the popish church harbors, protects, amuses, and cheers up not only criminal priests, drunkards, seducers, rapists, sodomites, and even murderers, but also lay criminals of every sort able to put up cash. And the irony of the whole abominable travesty, justice and religion, is emphasized by the fact that the foul priests immured in these shelters of unpunished rascality actually celebrate Holy Mass every morning. So shameful the conduct of these protected criminal priests that the civil authorities at Longueuil Point, Canada, felt constrained in the public interest to forbid the ambassadors of Christ retired to the priestly refuge house in that locality from appearing on the King's Highway, which some of these saintly hermits had enlivened by insulting women and girls. There was executed in Massachusetts not long ago a Baptist minister named Richson, who had seduced and then poisoned a too confiding girl of his flock. Richson's crime was so grave and punishment meted out duly called for. But how different the treatment awarded to a Catholic priest guilty of destroying girls. Instances like the Kipner case abound everywhere. That, for instance, of priest Boyle of North Carolina, who some years ago turned his church edifice into a brothel, attracted nationwide attention. He assaulted in his room in the church building a respectable young lady, daughter of one of the leading Catholic families of Southland. His guilt was so atrocious as to be incontestable, and when the sentence of death was first pronounced on him, a dissenting voice was raised in all North Carolina or anywhere else, north or south. Not a dissenting voice was raised in all North Carolina or anyone else, north or south. James Cardinal Gibbons and other Catholic prelates at once, however, got busy. They first had the death sentence modified into one condemning Boyle for life to state prison. No sooner had Boyle been placed behind the state's bars than the aforesaid Gibbons and his hierarchical associates started to obtain his release. They finally succeeded, and Boyle is to today busy in priestly ranks somewhere under some assumed name, seducing other women, violating girls, and preparing himself generally by studied and ceaseless licentiousness for high places in the priestly asylum, or Elysium. No purgatory for Boyle and his likes. One O'Grady, an Irish priest who had seduced a girl named Gilmartin in the Old Land, followed her to America, where she had fled from his lecherous attentions, tracing her to Cincinnati. Grady foully murdered her on Central Avenue, a busy thoroughfare of Cincinnati. The cowardly murderer then feigned insanity and finally succeeded in escaping from the lunatic asylum. Rome's cunning Italian hand is all too visible in Grady's deliverance from the punishment his atrocity called for. Grady is today exercising the sacred ministry under an assumed name, of course. That the race of Kipner is still alive. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to check and see. I think I'm going to have to stop reading and then come back later. So here we go. Let me just finish this part. That the race of Kipner is still alive and active in Ohio. 2 other Ohio instances of priestly depravity, both recent, very clearly demonstrate. The police records of every city of any size in America can offer similar and several even worse instances of depravity on the part of James Cardinal Gibbons, ambassador of Christ. But let the Ohio cases speak here. And I'm going to end that there because this is a very long chapter and we're almost at 1 hour. And it's hard to upload. I don't know why, but my computer is old. So anyway, keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. You have a good night. Bye-bye.